Have you ever found yourself chasing someone else's approval? Maybe it's a boss who never seems satisfied, a partner whose validation feels like the ultimate prize, or even a social media audience whose likes and comments dictate your worth. It's exhausting. Feeling like you're running on a treadmill, going nowhere fast, but still hoping that one day, you'll finally feel like you're enough. That constant need for validation. That inner voice telling you that you need to prove yourself over and over again. That's your ego talking. And while the ego can sometimes push us to succeed, more often than not, it's the very thing holding us back. The good news is, that you don't have to let it control you. You can learn to let it go. Detaching from your ego isn't about giving up or losing ambition. It's about freeing yourself from the mental traps that keep you stuck, and it starts with small, intentional steps. Think of it as progress, just 1% at a time. Today, I want to walk you through how detaching from your ego can transform your life. Together, we'll explore the ego, why it's so hard to manage, and how Stoic principles can guide you toward peace, purpose, and authentic confidence. By the end of this, you'll have the tools to recognize your ego in action and make subtle but powerful shifts to reclaim your inner strength. Let's dive in. Understanding the ego. The ego is a tricky thing. It's not inherently bad, in fact, it's a part of you that wants to protect you. But it has a way of distorting reality. The ego craves control, validation, and recognition. It whispers that your worth is tied to how others see you or what you achieve. It convinces you that you're only as good as your last accomplishment, your last compliment, or your last big win. Sound familiar? Now, think about how this plays out in your day-to-day life. Maybe someone criticizes you, and suddenly, you're consumed by thoughts about defending yourself. Or maybe you scroll through social media and feel a pang of inadequacy because someone else seems to be doing better than you. That's your ego at work, pulling the strings and keeping you tied to external validation. The Stoics, who were masters of understanding human nature, warned us about this very thing. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The truth is, that the ego thrives on things you can't control, other people's opinions, the outcomes of your efforts, or the circumstances of your life. The more you tie your self-worth to these external factors, the more you're setting yourself up for frustration. But what if you could untangle yourself from that? What if you could learn to live with a sense of inner peace, no matter what happens around you? That's where detachment comes in. Let's break this down further. The ego doesn't just feed on validation, it's also deeply intertwined with fear. Fear of failure. Fear of rejection. Fear of being seen as less than perfect. These fears push us to act in ways that don't serve us, like overworking ourselves to prove a point or staying silent to avoid conflict. But here's the paradox, the more we give in to these fears, the stronger the ego becomes, and the harder it is to let go. It's a cycle, one that the Stoics understood and addressed with their teachings on rational thought and self-control. Detachment and its power. Detachment doesn't mean becoming indifferent or apathetic. It's not about withdrawing from life or relationships. It's quite the opposite. Detachment is about creating space to breathe, think, and act with clarity. It's about recognizing when your ego is steering the wheel and gently taking back control. The Stoics often spoke of this as mastering your mind. Epictetus, another great Stoic thinker, said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Let's take a moment to reflect on that. How often do you find yourself reacting instead of responding? Maybe someone cuts you off in traffic, and you immediately feel a surge of anger. Or perhaps a coworker gets praised for something you worked on, and jealousy flares up. These are natural feelings, but they're also signals that your ego is in charge. By practicing detachment, you can learn to pause, observe, and choose a different response. Consider this: the ego often thrives on urgency. It wants you to react quickly, to defend yourself, to prove something. But what if you slowed down? What if, instead of rushing to respond, you gave yourself the gift of time? Time to reflect, time to breathe, time to decide how you truly want to show up. Detachment creates that space. It allows you to step back, assess the situation, and act in a way that aligns with your values rather than your ego. Let's imagine a practical example. Say you're in a meeting, and someone dismisses your idea. Your ego might urge you to argue, to defend your point, to make sure everyone knows you're right. But what if, instead, you paused? You acknowledged the dismissal without taking it personally and took the time to consider whether their criticism had merit. Not only does this approach reduce unnecessary conflict, but it also allows you to respond with composure and confidence. That's the power of detachment. Applying the 1% rule. This is where the 1% rule comes in. Change doesn't have to be overwhelming. You don't need to dismantle your ego overnight. Instead, focus on small, incremental shifts. For example, the next time you feel the sting of criticism, instead of reacting defensively, take a deep breath and ask yourself, is this criticism valid? Even if it's not, why does it bother me so much? That pause, that moment of reflection, is a step toward detachment. It's a small step, but small steps add up over time. The Stoics had a beautiful way of keeping things in perspective. They practiced something called the view from above, where they imagined themselves looking down on their life from a high vantage point. From that perspective, the things that felt so urgent and important often seemed small and fleeting. This exercise can help you detach from the ego's grip. The next time you're caught up in a moment of pride, anger, or envy, try imagining yourself as just one tiny part of a vast, interconnected universe. It's humbling, isn't it? And it's a reminder that the ego's concerns are often trivial in the grand scheme of things. Imagine applying this daily. Every time you encounter a situation that stirs your ego, a disagreement, a setback, a moment of envy, pause and reflect. These small pauses, repeated consistently, can reshape your relationship with your ego. It's not about suppressing your feelings or pretending they don't exist. It's about understanding them, choosing how to engage with them, and ultimately reducing their hold on you. Focus on what you can control. Another way to practice detachment is to focus on what you can control. The Stoics were adamant about this. They taught that while you can't control external events, you can control your thoughts, your actions, and your attitudes. For instance, if you're working on a project and things aren't going as planned, instead of obsessing over the outcome, shift your focus to the effort you're putting in. Are you doing your best? Are you acting with integrity? That's what matters. Marcus Aurelius put it perfectly when he said, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." Let's expand this further. Think about how much energy we waste worrying about things outside our control. The traffic jam that makes us late. The opinion someone else has about us. The weather on the day of our big event. The Stoics remind us that these things are not ours to manage. What is ours is how we respond to them. By focusing on what we can control, we not only conserve our energy but also reclaim our peace. Over time, these small shifts create a ripple effect. As you detach from the need for validation, you'll find a sense of freedom that's hard to describe. You'll start to notice that criticism doesn't sting as much, compliments don't inflate your ego, and setbacks don't feel like the end of the world. Instead, you'll feel grounded, steady, and at peace with yourself. Detachment in relationships. Now, let's talk about relationships. Detachment doesn't mean shutting people out. It means showing up fully and authentically, without expecting others to complete you or validate you. When you detach from your ego, you stop clinging to people's approval. This creates space for healthier, more genuine connections. You can give love freely, without strings attached. And you can receive love without questioning your worth. The Stoics believed that relationships should be rooted in mutual respect and growth. Seneca said, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." Detachment allows you to do just that. Let's dig deeper. How often do we place unfair expectations on our relationships? We expect our partners to make us happy, our friends to always agree with us, and our colleagues to constantly recognize our contributions. These expectations are ego-driven, and they set us up for disappointment. By practicing detachment, we can approach our relationships with a sense of balance. We can appreciate others for who they are, rather than what they can do for us. And we can set boundaries that protect our peace without diminishing our connections. Overcoming the fear of failure. Finally, let's address the fear of failure. The ego hates failure. It sees failure as a threat to its identity and its sense of worth. But the Stoics saw failure differently. To them, failure was a teacher, a necessary part of growth. Epictetus reminded us that, you become what you give your attention to. If you focus on the lessons within your failures, rather than the sting of the failure itself, you'll grow stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Imagine reframing failure not as the end of something but as the beginning of understanding. Each misstep becomes an opportunity to learn. Each setback becomes a chance to recalibrate. This perspective doesn't come easily, especially in a world that glorifies success and shames failure. But the Stoics teach us to embrace imperfection. They remind us that growth comes not from avoiding failure but from engaging with it courageously and honestly. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought: detachment isn't about giving up. It's about letting go of what no longer serves you, so you can create space for what truly matters. It's about progress, not perfection. Remember, even a 1% improvement each day can lead to monumental changes over time. So, take that first step. Pause, reflect, and choose to respond with intention. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this message resonates with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share one way you plan to practice detachment this week in the comments below. And if you'd like to continue exploring Stoic principles and personal growth, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Together, we can build a life of peace, purpose, and resilience. Until next time, stay grounded and keep growing.